Hey, this is Alonco, and I'm here presenting Broken. It's just going to be a test to see what builds in Path of Exile are, well, broken. So this is going to be my first video, and it's a Flicker Strike build. I know lots of people have heard Flicker Strike before, and Flicker Strike builds have been common in the past. However, recently, Flicker Strike has only been common insofar as Oro's Sacrifice, which is a sword that ignites people and causes you to gain frenzy charges on Ignite. This build, on the other hand, uses Terminus Est. The build was relatively easy to level because I was mostly getting physical damage. Of course, because I was going for two-handed sword nodes and I was a shadow, it was a little bit strange. This is an assassin build, specifically to try to crit as much as possible to get that frenzy charge on critical strike as often as possible in Terminus Est. I would say if I had to rate the leveling of this build, I'd say it's about a 6 out of 10. It definitely isn't the hardest build out there. It definitely could be easier if I was going a more standard physical build. And yeah, but in the end game, it does pretty well. I'm doing a beach map here. I know a beach map is very low tier. I know that this is a white map. I know that a lot of people might have an issue with me using a beach map, but honestly, I'm just testing these builds as they are entering endgame. And if you see here, Flicker Strike can clear very quickly. I am doing this map live, and I'm just going to run around. The nice thing about Flicker Strike is that I can literally just hold down right click, and as I hold down right click, my guy naturally flies towards people and kills them all. If you notice, I don't even need my cursor anywhere near where I'm attacking. I kind of have it going around in the upper right corner of the screen, and this build in a lot of ways can just essentially AFK. I would say that this build is very effective offensively. However, because of the way that I built this build, and this is mostly just because I made mistakes while building the character, I ended up with very low defense. You can see I've only got barely over 4,000 life, I have no energy shield to speak of. I actually went acrobatics and phase acrobatics on this build, and that was probably a mistake. I probably should have done something more energy shield based or a mixture of both evasion and energy shield, because this build can get one-shot by things. Anyway, I would say that this build in the endgame is very effective, or at least at the beginning of the endgame. Obviously, I'm not talking Shaper here. I haven't even attempted Shaper on this character. And yeah, as I go, I just hold down right click, I kill things. According to Path of Building, the build can hit over 1,000,000 DPS. Anyway, that's kind of the intro segment of the build. I'm going to kill the boss here really quick, and then I'm going to go into a deeper dive. If you notice, boss dies almost instantly. This just does insane amounts of single target damage. So, let's talk about the build itself. Let me go ahead and open a portal, go back to my hideout. So, and accidentally enter my beach map again because I'm dumb. So I started with this build thinking I want to go Flicker Strike, and I wanted to go Terminus Est Flicker Strike. This was at the end of 2.4, where Terminus Est was actually very low on damage. It got buffed in 2.6, sorry. Whatever league we're in right now, it got buffed in Legacy, and I didn't actually know it was going to get buffed. I was planning this build beforehand. The build was going to initially be a cast on critical build. Partially because of the buffs of Terminus Est, it wouldn't actually surprise me if this build is now very popular, but in case it isn't, this is going to go over the build. Now, the thing that is important to understand about Terminus Est is at the bottom here it says gain a frenzy charge on critical strike. It says on critical strike. See, that's important because it does not say that the critical strike has to be dealt by an attack. In fact, that critical strike can be a spell. It can be basically anything that hits under the definition of the game's hit. And this means that things like your glove enchant that can attack on hit can give you frenzy charges. Any spell can give you frenzy charges. And this is very important because it means that while someone might naively look at Terminus Est and say the only way you can keep doing flicker strikes is if you crit on every single flicker strike, in reality you just have to crit with something on every single flicker strike, and it doesn't really matter what it is. So what I have is I do have that attack with Word on Force on hit. That's actually probably the worst one. I used to have Word of Rage or something like that, and it would throw out a bunch of fiery stuff, and those would crit like crazy, and it would end up giving me a ton of frenzy charges. But I don't really need that many, because what I also have is I've got a cast when damage taken up here linked up to Blade Vortex, which means that I'll naturally spawn a Blade Vortex. Blade Vortex can crit multiple times and can give you multiple frenzy charges by doing so. And I also have another cast when damage taken group that has things like Bladefall and Ethereal Knives, both so I can get some more damage, but also so that, you know, I can get some more of those crits in. It's also linked up to Ice Golem just so I can keep my Ice Golem up automatically without having to worry about it. Obviously, that's mostly preference. What you put in those cast when damage taken links is up to you. You don't even necessarily need to use cast when damage taken if you can find other ways to cast spells. Initially, this build was going to be a cast on critical build, back before Terminus Est was buffed. Because Terminus Est was buffed, I didn't need to go cast on critical, but with cast on critical, it works the same way, right? If you cast on critical Blade Vortex, for example, you're going to generate tons of frenzy charges. Sorry. So, one thing to remember is that, of course, with the Blade Vortex change, you can only have one instance of Blade Vortex up at a time, so you want to throw that in whatever is going to cause it to cast the most frequently for your build. I did use Bronze Lith in order to up my Flicker Strike. I'd managed to get a 6 link on it without really trying too much. I used Adziria's Step. This is because I went full evasion. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that again. And let me just go into what I did in my passive tree. So, what's important is that you go Assassin. And the reason why this is important is because you want Deadly Infusion to up your critical strike chance. That's your base critical strike chance, and that does an amazing amount of good for you. And then you also want Toxic Delivery. That gives you a poison you inflict with critical strike deals 100% more damage. Once 3.0 comes out and Poison Double Dipping is no longer there, I'm not sure whether Toxic Delivery is going to be this overpowered, but Toxic Delivery is where most of the damage from this build comes from. You're flickering into people, you're critting, and you're dealing ridiculously strong poisons. Because of that, I get things like Fatal Toxins, which increase your poison damage. And yeah, as I mentioned before, I do get Acrobatics and Phase Acrobatics, and as I mentioned before, I actually wouldn't suggest doing that. I'd suggest going some sort of hybrid energy shield build, so you've got a bigger buffer. Currently with 4,000 life, I can get one-shot, and I do get one-shot by things, and they're things that I necessarily can't avoid, because one of the natures of the Flicker Strike is that it's completely uncontrollable. You fly all over the map, you don't have any possible way of dodging things in the middle of Flicker Strikes. Either your Flicker Strike just happens to dodge it, you happen to dodge it with Acrobatics, or you just get one-shot. It's happened a lot. Anyway, the build picks up as many frenzy charges and as many power charges as possible. Grabs a few jewel slots on the way. Those actually have life in them right now, I believe. Yeah, all of them have life in them because I was running very low on life. If you are smarter than I am, you will be picking up much more tank with this build. I'd say overall I'm actually very impressed with this build's clear speed. I think that this build has what it takes to be one of the stronger builds in the game right now. I wouldn't be surprised if I saw some nerfs on Terminus Est. This build does have the tendency to lag out servers when you're fighting huge numbers of enemies. It is freaky. And it's also the sort of build that's kind of bad to play with other people. I did try playing it with some of my friends, and you tend to just kind of fly across the map murdering everything, and they get left behind. They don't get experience, they don't get loot, and they get kind of angry at you. Anyway, that's about it for the Flicker Strike build. Oh, I'll go over my links really quick. Flicker Strike linked with Poison, as I mentioned before. Multi-Strike, just so that my Flicker hits more quickly. Remember, Multi-Strike isn't going to give you more frenzy charges. Multi-Strike is explicitly built so that if you crit with Multi-Strike, it only counts as one crit. So don't rely on Multi-Strike to give you frenzy charges. Void Manipulation in order to increase my chaos damage. Melee physical damage in order to increase both my physical damage and my chaos damage. And then Melee Splash. You could obviously take off Melee Splash for a single target. There aren't that many good things to put inside of that last link. And yeah, but Melee Splash does fantastically well, and this build certainly still does plenty of damage even with Melee Splash in it. Alright. So I think that is about the end of the build, and so I'm going to go ahead and say I love this build. I think it's fantastic. I think I completely screwed up with the squishiness of this build. I think you could definitely make it way better. But this build is definitely worth running, and I would very much suggest it. Anyway, have a fantastic day.